This Monday saw a dramatic end of the 15-year-old Sheikh Hasina regime in Bangladesh. The protesters, mostly students, did not spare the legacy of country's founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, as there were many of his statues being taken down. There is jubilation among the youths and also among the Bangladeshi diaspora as Hasina was forced to resign. Mohammad Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank, a bank for small finance loans and also a long-time critique of Hasina, is about to take over as the head of the interim government proposed by the army. Despite that, tensions and uncertainty prevails about who would be leading the country and will there be free and fair elections after 3 consecutively failed ones. The state of minorities is also an issue of concern in Bangladesh. The Scroll has reported that post Hasina's departure, Hindu community was on edge with sporadic reports of mob turning on homes and religious places of minorities. There hasn't been any deaths so far, but temples by Ramakrishna Mission and ISKCON were attacked by mobs related to the Jamaat, as reports say. However, there are conflicting reports on the extent of the violence, with some suggesting that the attacks are not as widespread as claimed. Amid this chaos, misinformation has also been rampant, adding to the confusion. After the failed uprising of the Arab Springs, there are apprehensions about the outcome of this revolution as well. Having said that, the students are assuring that this regime won't go down in history as another failed coup. To clear the confusion and to get a clear picture, we speak with Sajen Shamsuddoza, a journalist and researcher based in Dhaka. He also works with the prominent newspaper, The Daily Star. I welcome Mr. Sajen to The Wire. The first question I wanted to ask was about the current situation, because this is mostly for the Indian audiences. So what is the current situation after the reports of Mohammad Yunus probably taking over?
Okay, currently there is still some uncertainty because, as you have already said, that Dr. Yunus is going to take over as the chief advisor of the interim government. But who will be the other persons or who will be the other members of the interim government? It is still not clear. And it was also expected that it should not take so much time or too long. So people are feeling that there are some certain uncertainty since for the last 2 days there is no government in the country, and also there are sporadic events of like attack on minority communities, and also there are some vandalism and also attack on the Aumi League peoples, and also in some places general people like the poor people, they are being attacked by the opposition and also the opportunists.
Okay. Sir, I will come to the question of minorities in just a bit, but just initially, I wanted to have a understanding from you whether the new regime or the regime change which is supposedly being happening right now, will it happen with peace, or will it have, or are you hopeful? Basically, my question is that are you hopeful about the future of Bangladesh?
Still I have already said that there is still some uncertainty because from the student activists who have led the kind of mass uprising, they said that they have certain demands and they want some certain form of reforms in the whole state system and in the constitution. So if those reform happens, then there is a good future because you already know that for the last 15 years there the election system that was totally rigged, the judiciary that gone through a whole political chaos, the administration, the police. So there is a kind of need of overhaul of the whole system, and the student leaders, they have certain proposals in that regard. So if those reforms can be done, and for that a certain period, like they have already proposed for 3 years to 6 years for the interim government, so if they can get that time and by that time they can create some political parties, because you know in Bangladesh there are basically two political parties, the Aumi League and the BMP, and there are also some small parties, but basically there are two political parties. So this time when the Aumi League is defeated or they were ousted, so there is a common feeling that okay, the BMP, they are going to take over the power. But many people, they don't want BMP because they say that BMP in the last 15 years they didn't play the proper role role a opposition should play. And there is also issue like that the Awami League, they also suppressed or repressed the BMP people. That is also there. So the people, they want a kind of new change. So they want a new political party. But you know that to build a political party, that is not a easy thing, particularly in the context of South Asia. So you need a certain kind of agenda, and people will, they will give their support to that agenda, and you will take a some time for forming a political parties. So the student leaders of these mass uprising or this movement, they want certain time. So if those kind of reforms happens, I think there is a kind of hope for the future of Bangladesh in terms of politics and also in terms of social changes.
Okay. Uh, Thank you for explaining it in detail about what you feel this regime change could mean for the future of the country. But right now there are uncertainties, and people are having their apprehensions, because in the past, when there have been uprising like these in the Arab world, we had seen an Islamist fundamentalist ideology taking root in the country. So, do you think that sort of this concern is valid of Islamic fundamentalist ideology taking over the Bangladesh polity?
Yes, there is kind of fear exists in Bangladesh, but I want to refer to the history of Bangladesh. If you look at the history of the Islamic parties in Bangladesh, particularly the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the biggest Islamic party in Bangladesh, they never got more than 5% vote in the election in the whole history of Bangladesh. So, oh yes, there is certain fear. They will come with BMP or other allies, and they will try to kind of to implement their rules and their agendas. But I think still in Bangladesh, since the liberation war, that is a big factor in the Bangladesh's history, in the Bangladesh's cultural ethos, and in the Bangladesh's political climate.
So I get it that you are trying to say that the Jamaat-e-Islami or the fundamentalist powers do not have the kind of voice that perhaps they have in other countries like like Pakistan. But there are reports. I just read a scroll article which mentioned that there were sporadic incidents of hate crimes against
But
the.
even if you look at the history of Pakistan, the Jamaat Islam is one of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, but I was particularly referring to an article published in the Scroll in India, which has a detail n number of instances where temples and members from the minority community, especially the Hindus, are being attacked. And there's also a mention of a report by an organization of Christians, Buddhists, and Hindus, which compiled a list of attacks on minorities. How true are these reports, and are there any casualties in this regard?
But, are you speaking about the violence against minority communities this time after the fall of Hasina's regime?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, of course. There are while there are events in various parts of Bangladesh, and there are attack against the Hindu minorities, also against the Ahmadiyya community, and also in some places attack were perpetrated against the mazars. Like there is a kind of thing in there is a Wahhabi Islam, and there are people who they respect the mazars and the peers. So there are some attacks on those shrines also. So these kinds of things happen in Bangladesh. But there is a thing that the student leaders from the very beginning, they have warned the people that these kind of attacks, these are happening to malign the achievement of the movement. Because if this kind of chaos can be created, then this movement can be maligned and said that this movement was led by the Jamaat Islam or other kind of fundamentalist group. But people who participated in these movements, and if you look at the demography of these participants, I am also a participant in this movement. So I can assure you that the most of the participants, they are general students. And even if there are certain elements from different fundamentalist groups like the Jamaat Shibir, there are Hizbut Tahrir and other type of Islamist organization, but they never led the agenda of this government. And if I will also request my audience to understand the fact that this movement, this was mainly this was organized against the 15 years corrupt rule of Sheikh Hasina, autocratic rule of Sheikh Hasina. And people had a certain demand that there is a kind of democracy needs to be restored, people's voting rights needs to be restored, the corruption that needs to be eliminated, the economy that needs to be revived. So those were the main demands in the whole movement. And if you look at the what the people are saying, their slogans, if you look at the wall writing in the walls, you will clearly see that these were not led by those Islamist forces. Certainly, some of them were part of in the movements, and it happens everywhere in the world. And
Right.
these type of mass uprising, even if you look at the 90s movement, there was a mass uprising against General Ershad. If you look at the 69 mass uprising in whole Pakistan, then it was also certain Islamic elements, they were part of the movement against Ayub Khan. But when the election happened in 1970, when the election in 1991 happened after the mass uprising, the Islamic fundamentalist force, they couldn't come to the power, and they didn't get that much vote even to kind of create a certain strong opposition. So that is the history of Bangladesh. I don't think this time there will be certain kind of nothing will happen different. Maybe maybe there is a kind of thing like that globally. There is a rise of Islamic fundamentalism, and there is also rise of Islamophobia. So I think both are problematic. So I think Bangladeshi people, as a Bangladeshi, I believe that this time also people will they will stick to the mainstream, and that mainstream that we don't love fundamentalism, and that is the history of Bangladesh.
So what you're saying is that the student protesters and the activists who are involved in this movement won't be swayed away by the Islamic fundamentalist ideology.
Of course, of
Okay,
course.
okay, but
And already, if you look at the movement from the July 5th
right,
to August 5th, for the 1 month, you will clearly see, if you look at their demands, if you look at the slogans people chanted in the movement, if you look at their
yeah,
slogans in the walls, you will clearly understand this.
definitely, definitely. Uh, just before we go, last couple of questions. One that can you just explain our viewers that why did this position come? Why did the position become so bad? As in, why did the people resort to so much protest, and why did the Hasina government respond the way it did, killing nearly 250 people, and among that 100 people just in a day? So, what was wrong with the Hasina regime? Can you, if in a jiffy, if you can explain to our audiences?
Yeah. So first thing first, the so far as of now, the total number of dead people is 437
Okay.
in the last 1 month.
Okay.
And if you look at the timeline of the movement, so when the prime minister he criticized the movement and the students participants, saying that they are the rajakars, he don't mention them directly, but the participants or the students, they kind of perceive that they were criticized like a rajakar. So then the student, they bring out a larger protest, and then Aumi League, they tried to use it as an issue to suppress the students, saying that these students, they are saying themselves Rajakar. So as a political party who uphold the spirit of the liberation war, we should suppress this. And then the whole movement take the violent turn. And when the ruling party student wing, Chhatro League, they attacked the students, and from then on the violence started. And when the violence spread, then the ruling party student wing and the police, they opened fire on students. And when the in Rangpur, a student named Abu Said, he was killed. And so it was a kind of a big turning moment, and the whole thing took a serious violent turn. And the government, instead of like they didn't hold dialogue with the students. They tried to suppress the movement. And if you look at the history of Bangladesh, you can't suppress the student movements, because students, people kind of, they have a soft corner, a sympathy for the students, and it is all over the world. Even if you look at the history of Bangladesh in 1952, which was a huge turning point for the Bangladesh history, because the language movement that kind of created the Bengali nationalism, that time it happened there. That Dhaka University, it was a kind of a center for the Muslim students who are open-minded, and the nearby area, that is Old Dhaka part, those are areas for the conservative people like the Nawabs and those Urdu-speaking people, and like these people, conservative area. And they used to hate this Dhaka University student because they kind of talk about the Islamic modernism or reforming the Islam, these kind of things. But in 1952, when that government, they opened fire on the students and students were killed, then those very people of old Dhaka, they supported the students, and they said that these students could be our son. So that thing prevails all over the world. When you kill or a torture a student, this time also people said that these students who were killed, Abu Said, he could be my son. So the parents, they joined the movement, and that's how the whole Bangladesh, they supported that movement. Because if in the last 15 years the Awami League regime, they suppressed, they kind of killed, they kind of in various ways they tortured the opposition parties, but people did not raise their voice in that much way. But when these happened for the students, then people really goes against the regime. And this was when I think the whole thing, the government, they were adamant, and they thought that the way they suppressed the opposition parties, they could suppress the students. So that was their mistake. And it happens every time. If you read the history of Ayub Khan, he also thought that, okay, I have done so many developments. And there is an interesting analogy that in 1968, when the mass uprising against Ayub Khan occurred, that year Ayub Khan was celebrating decade of development. And this time in Bangladesh, the Sheikh Hasina regime, they were also celebrating various kinds of their development, but they didn't give people their right to vote, their right to express their opinion. So that matters very much for the peoples of Bangladesh. So how many times you talk about the development, how many development projects you do, but people, they want their fundamental rights. So that was the issue. And so it get a chance to, people get a chance to say or to raise their voice through the quota movement. And that's the thing. I think that's what the if you ask me to analyze, so
that was such a beautiful explanation of the past 1 month. And I think what you are trying to say is that the student movement was slowly, but in fact fast, it boggled down and became a people's movement. And just one last question before you go, Sajen, about as an Indian, we are also, along with the concern for the minorities, we are also concerned about the statues of Bangabandhu Mujibur Rahman being taken down. He has a sentimental value, and also as a historical figure, he led this 1971 movement against Pakistan. So how do you personally feel about the statues being torn down?
I personally strongly condemn these kind of acts, particularly the way they vandalized the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Museum that was in Dhanmondi 32. And even today morning, I went there and saw the kind of havoc the people created. I strongly condemn that kind of vandalism. But I want to add one thing, that in the last 15 years, Sheikh Hasina tried to create a cult of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman by sidelining or removing other important freedom fighters and political leaders in the history of Bangladesh. I want to highlight two names. One is Maulana Bhashani, you must have heard his name, and another is Tajuddin Ahmed. He was the leader and the wartime prime minister. That means in 1971, the government that took shelter in India, he led that government. But if you look at the 15 years history of Aumi League, they didn't recognize the contribution. Even the people like Tajuddin who were part of the Aumi League, they respected Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, but they didn't get the respect back from the Aumi League. So there is a kind of attempt that one leader, one party, one country, and it happened in the first regime of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman also. And there was a kind of slogan that one party, one leader, one country during the regime of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So I think that was also wrong. Of course, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he has the most contribution for the country Bangladesh that is today. But there are also other important people who have contributed, and they must be respected. I mean, you have to establish a culture of respect for all the freedom fighters, not just your father, not just your husband, because the BMP, they also did the same. They kind of created that the BMP's prime minister Khalda Jia's husband Ziaur Rahman, they kind of that propaganda that Ziaur Rahman was the only freedom fighter. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had no role in the 71. Bhashani had no role. So there is a kind of problem in Bangladeshi culture. They try to create, because particularly these two parties, they try to create a cult. So this kind of cult is always problematic. So in that way, I must condemn any destruction or any kind of vandalism that was perpetrated in the last 3 days. But I also highlight this thing that we must come out of this cult culture, and this is a problem not only for Bangladesh. This problem is also in India and also in Pakistan. Yeah,
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mr. Sajen, for joining us at The Wire. And all eyes are on Bangladesh, and we are really hopeful that this regime change really gives out positive messages. And it's only time will tell whether this entire revolution was a success or not. But you are hopeful, and that's why we are also hopeful. Let's stay hopeful for the betterment of this country. And that's it from me. My name is Zeeshan Kaskar, and you are watching The Wire.